Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Law enforcement officers take an oath to protect and serve, ensuring the safety of the public. However, while many uphold this duty with integrity, some abuse their power in shocking and unjust ways. One such disturbing incident unfolded inside a supermarket, where a disabled man, simply trying to buy groceries, became the victim of a wrongful arrest. The footage of the event, once released, sparked public outrage and exposed the officers involved for their reckless abuse of authority. A routine shopping trip turns into a nightmare. The incident took place in Denver, Colorado, when Ethan Williams, a 47-year-old disabled man, entered a local grocery store to pick up a few basic necessities. Ethan suffered from a neurological condition that affected his speech and motor skills, making routine tasks more difficult for him. However, he was completely independent and had always managed his shopping on his own, until that day. Due to his condition, Ethan moved slower than the average shopper. At the self-checkout, he carefully counted his cash, making sure he had the right amount to complete his purchase. But his slow pace caught the attention of store employees who seemed impatient with him. Instead of offering help, they made a cruel decision. They called the police, reporting that a suspicious man was lingering at the register for too long. Officers arrive with a preconceived judgment. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived on the scene, Officer Matthew Corbin and his partner, Officer Ryan Tate. Instead of assessing the situation with an open mind, they approached Ethan aggressively, as if he were a criminal rather than a customer trying to buy groceries. "Sir, take out all of your money and step aside," Corbin demanded. Ethan, startled by the sudden confrontation, tried to explain. His words came out slowly and slightly slurred, a symptom of his condition. I'm just paying for my groceries," he stammered. But the officers weren't interested in listening. As Ethan struggled to retrieve his cash from his wallet, Corbin grabbed the money from his hands, mistaking his slow reaction for defiance. "You need to come with us," Tate added, his tone cold and dismissive. Ethan, still trying to understand what was happening, became visibly distressed. "Why? What did I do?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. A disabled man treated like a criminal. As the officer spoke over him, giving multiple commands at once, Ethan became overwhelmed. The situation escalated when he instinctively reached for his phone and dialed 911, desperate for help. He had always been taught to call the police in emergencies, but this time, the threat was the police themselves. "Put the phone down," Corbin barked, snatching it from his hands before the call could go through. "Are you real police?" Ethan asked, his eyes scanning their uniforms in fear. He had trouble distinguishing between store security and law enforcement, which only added to his panic. "You're under arrest," Corbin snapped. "For what?" Ethan pleaded. "For refusing to identify yourself," Tate answered, twisting his arms behind his back to slap the handcuffs on. Ethan's protests fell on deaf ears. "I was just trying to pay." His words trailed off as the cold metal tightened around his wrists. The bogus charges and the humiliation. Ethan, who had committed no crime, was then accused of trespassing, a charge that made no sense, as he had entered the store legally and had been in the process of making a purchase. The officers informed him that the supermarket had now banned him, even though he had done nothing wrong. "You can never come back here again," Corbin stated matter-of-factly, as if this were a reasonable consequence for simply taking too long at checkout. The injustice didn't stop there. As Ethan stood in handcuffs, struggling to process what was happening, Officer Corbin began whistling casually, showing no concern for the distress he had caused. It was as if this was just another routine day, just another person he had overpowered with his badge. When Ethan asked once more for proof that they were actual police officers, Corbin simply scoffed. "We told you who we are. You don't need proof," he said dismissively. By now, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered. Some whispered among themselves, realizing that something wasn't right about what they were witnessing. Others pulled out their phones, recording the disturbing scene. "Come on, let's go," Tate said, grabbing Ethan by the arm and leading him toward the police cruiser parked outside. "Please," Ethan pleaded. "I didn't do anything wrong." But his words were ignored. Public outrage and the fallout. When the footage from the body cameras was made public, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The video quickly went viral across social media platforms, drawing the attention of not just local communities, but the nation as a whole. People were appalled by what they had witnessed. An innocent, disabled man being treated as a criminal, handcuffed and dragged away by officers who showed no empathy or regard for his condition. The outrage was palpable as the public demanded answers from the Denver Police Department. Disability advocacy groups were among the first to respond, condemning the officers' actions. These organizations, which work tirelessly to promote understanding and equal treatment for individuals with disabilities, released statements decrying the blatant mistreatment Ethan had suffered. This is a clear example of how people with disabilities are often ignored, dismissed, and treated as if they don't matter, said one spokesperson. Instead of offering help, these officers chose to escalate the situation and unlawfully arrest a man who needed assistance, not punishment. Advocates highlighted how the incident was symptomatic of broader systemic issues, where vulnerable individuals, particularly those with disabilities, are at risk of being targeted and mistreated by law enforcement. Ethan didn't deserve this. He was simply trying to buy groceries. But because of his disability, the officers didn't see him as a person. They saw him as a problem, another advocate remarked. Public figures, including politicians and human rights activists, also joined the outcry. Local lawmakers in Colorado demanded a full investigation into the incident, calling for accountability from the officers involved. Many expressed their shock that such a clear case of misconduct could happen in broad daylight, with witnesses recording the entire exchange. One state representative even announced they were introducing new legislation to ensure better training for police officers on handling situations involving disabled individuals. The goal was to prevent such incidents from happening again and to protect people who might be vulnerable in public spaces. The mainstream media picked up the story, with news outlets from across the country covering the wrongful arrest. Talk show hosts, news anchors, and journalists held in-depth discussions about the disturbing reality of police misconduct. What happened here was not just an abuse of power, but a violation of human dignity, one anchor stated during a primetime news segment. We have to ask ourselves, how did we get here, and how can we prevent this from happening again? The debate was heated, with calls for reform growing louder by the hour. The Denver Police Department, under mounting pressure, issued a statement acknowledging the incident and announcing an internal review. But this response was seen as too little, too late. The public wasn't satisfied with vague assurances. They wanted concrete action. Within a few days, Officer Matthew Corbin was fired from the Denver Police Department. His dismissal was a clear message that the department could not tolerate such misconduct, but it also raised questions about the broader issue of accountability within law enforcement. Many wondered how Corbin had been allowed to continue serving as an officer in the first place, given the disturbing nature of his behavior. In addition to his firing, Corbin faced criminal charges. He was officially charged with false imprisonment, perjury, making a false report, and battery, all stemming from his unlawful actions during Ethan's arrest. The charges sent a strong message that abuse of power would not be tolerated, but for many, the legal consequences were just the beginning of a much-needed conversation about police reform. Officer Ryan Tate, Corbin's partner in the arrest, was also placed on administrative leave while an internal investigation was conducted. The scrutiny of his actions, which were seen as complicit in the wrongful arrest, added fuel to the fire. While Tate had not directly initiated the arrest, his failure to intervene or de-escalate the situation led many to question his role in the incident. As the legal proceedings against Corbin continued, the media kept a close eye on the case. People followed every development, hoping for justice and accountability. Public protests, rallies, and petitions calling for stronger protections for disabled individuals and more thorough training for police officers became common. The protests were peaceful, but they were loud and unrelenting, with signs reading, "Justice for Ethan," "End police brutality," and "Protect the disabled." In the months that followed, the case of Ethan Williams became a catalyst for broader discussions on police training and reform. Legal experts, civil rights groups, and community leaders argued that the officer's actions were part of a larger pattern of systemic problems within law enforcement. "This isn't just about one bad officer," one attorney said. "It's about an entire culture of policing that treats certain individuals as expendable, and that needs to change." For Ethan, the fallout from the incident would stay with him long after the media coverage died down. The emotional trauma of being humiliated in public, the fear he felt as he was thrown into a police car, and the stigma of being treated as a criminal for doing nothing wrong all took a toll on his mental and physical well-being. Though he eventually regained his freedom, the scars of that day remained, and he began to speak out about the importance of protecting people like him in society. "No one should have to go through what I went through," Ethan said in a televised interview. "All I wanted to do was buy my groceries. But instead, I was treated like a criminal. It wasn't just the police who failed me. It was society as a whole." In the end, while Corbin's termination and criminal charges offered a sense of justice, the case of Ethan Williams was far from over. It continued to fuel the push for police reform and better treatment of individuals with disabilities. As people rallied around Ethan, they not only fought for justice for him, but also for a world where such abuse of power would never happen again.